All right, welcome back to Chapter 7 on social stratification, and this is Episode 2. Episode 2. Don't ask me. Just trying to have fun at this point. All right, so let's look at a couple different types of systems. The caste system and a class system. Now, a caste system, typically we think of India. A class system, that's the type of stratification system that we have in place. So here's a couple real basics right out of the gate. Caste system, social stratification is based on ascription or birth, right? So this is the position that you already have, not achieved position, but this is where you were at when you were born during your life, right? And that's basically where you're going to stay, And then we have a class system. So social stratification based on both birth, that's part of it certainly, and individual achievement. If we had a caste system here, there really wouldn't be any point or purpose to you going to college because you already know this is where you are and that's when you're going to stay. So, why do that? Right. So if we look at characteristics of stratified systems, rankings apply to social categories of people. Okay. Ranking also influences your life experience and opportunities. Okay. If you're at the very top, you may have a lot of wealth or prestige. You may have, and oftentimes do have, a lot more opportunities available to you and life experiences as well. And this is where in sociology we get to this. These will both be on the exam. I think they're very important. And that is the difference between achieved status and ascribed status. Okay? So achieved status is linked to the acquisition of socially valued credentials or skills. You acquire that yourself. You achieve it. You go to school, you earn the grades, you work the job, you put in the effort. And ascribed would be linked to characteristics that cannot be altered or at least are present right away. Okay? Race, your perceived gender, your initial socioeconomic status, right? That's your religion at birth. Those are ascribed. Okay. And yeah, sure, some of those can be altered, but that's kind of right out of the gate. And they're not earned. It's just what you get, sort of that transmission piece from your family. So hierarchical positions of social categories tend to change slowly over time. Is India changing? Holy cow, yes, you bet, which is fantastic. We want more people out of poverty. We want more children surviving. We want the amount of money that people earn so that they're not always in such abject poverty to be more. Yes, of course, but that takes a long, long, long time. Certainly our system as well, right? Slowly over time. And the same is true with culture. Even though we know what needs to be done, we need to pay women or people who identify as gender female equally. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, but we'll get around to it, right? So even with good intentions, and particularly when there are not, it changes slowly over time. All right, so here's three systems. Global systems, stratification, slavery, where some people are owned by others. Does slavery exist today? Absolutely, whether that is in the sex trade and sex working and that type of thing. It is also just flat out, people are still owned by other people in parts of this world, and even here. The caste system, people's status is determined at birth. Remember, we said that was ascription. That'd be more like India. It is closed. Okay, it's not an open system of stratification. It allows little change in position, and for a long time, almost none, if no, change of position. We have a class system. People's status is based on ownership and control of resources, and also the type of work you do. Who has the resources? Who has ownership? I mean, even with my house, it's a $500,000 farm. I own it, but if I don't pay for a couple months, somebody else is going to own it, right? And a class system is, associated with achievement. It is a much more open system, and it permits much more social mobility, certainly than a caste system, right? And we're not even going to compare it to slavery because people just have no rights in those situations, basically whatsoever. So I also have here, in some cases, we talk about the ability to be mobile and go from here to here. I said, yes, it does happen, but it doesn't happen in this culture as often, and there isn't as much mobility as we would like to believe. All right, speaking of belief, do you believe in the American dream? All right, survey says, what is your answer? We'll at least get your answer. Oftentimes, when a class answers this question, we're pretty split, right? And we're also split in our definition of the American dream. It is not the same for everyone. We have to understand that. So I think this is a good middle of the road definition. The belief that if people work hard and you play by the rules, you'll have a chance to get ahead. Seems like it makes sense, right? Certainly based on the assumption that people in the United States have equality, though, right? They've got equality and they've got opportunity regardless of race, creed, color, national origin, relationship orientation, sex, religion, you name it. So I guess think about what it is for you, like whether or not you believe in it. What is the American dream? Maybe not in just one word, but what is it to you? And I think it's interesting because when sitting in a classroom, right, 200 people, we have almost 200 different answers, right? Because this is something that each person, although we have a general idea, feel very specifically about. And of course, that has to do with power and access in the experiences, particularly in the social class that you've been born into. So the class system, what is it? Meritocracy, that makes sense. Social stratification based on personal merit. Then you've got social mobility, the change in that position, we talked about that. And status consistency. And then this would be the degree of uniformity in a person's social standing, right? Across various dimensions of social inequality. How consistent is that social standing? What's that look like? So in a class system, a lot of times we talk about a ladder, but a class system also might be good for a teardrop because we know a majority of the people in the system are on the bottom, you know, and that's getting heavier the whole time as the middle starts to get tighter and tighter and makes way in a teardrop shape for just very few. And that is what we're finding out statistically. The middle class is becoming very small, and the lower class or lower middle class is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, while just a few people at the top of that teardrop or ladder have control of much of everyone's wealth and other resources. So I like this because we talk about a teardrop shape, its economic position, it's associated with differences in income, wealth, and certainly your occupation. And we value some occupations really high, but they might not pay very well, right? Or vice versa. So I like the definition of life chances. That's just a great social term. What are my life chances? Tell me, please. And that's just opportunities and obstacles that you're going to encounter during your life. I mean, might be an education, maybe it's a gender piece, maybe it's a race piece, maybe it's an ability piece, social life, work, and any other areas that are critical to social mobility, right? Certainly influenced by class. So all of these life chances, all of that kind of combines what kind of opportunities are you going to have? And we know that. We know based on certain race, based on a certain age, based on a certain wealth. We know how many opportunities or how few you will have, relatively speaking, based on that. And we've already talked about social mobility. All right, sorry about the way that this played out, but stratification in a class society. So social mobility allows a person to change their socioeconomic position. I mean, that's, again, why most of you are going to college, to be able to make more money and perhaps climb that ladder or that teardrop a little bit more than your parents or your family did. Class position is determined by your economic status. Much of that economic status can be earned, and for many people, they inherit it, and it is not earned. Rather than by religion or tradition, which is when we're looking at caste systems. So again, this is a class definition, not a caste definition. That's relatively fluid. The boundaries between classes can be crossed. Again, you can find people that were not born with a silver spoon in their mouth or a great deal of wealth, suddenly interacting with and at the same level, at least in as far as class position. Certainly achieved rather than ascribed more in a class position. So if I say achieved, you know that's class. If I say ascribed, you know that's a caste system. And that would be a status given not by birth, but by the merit or achievement in such areas as education and occupation. That hustle, what you're trying to do, how hard you work. And you might work 10 times harder than your male counterpart and still not be able to achieve the class position that you want to, or your desired class position. Now, these barriers, they are more fluid in a class system, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a myriad of barriers in place for people as they try to, have some type of social mobility. All right. I climb that ladder, right? Climb those steps. Social mobility is possible for people with education and skills. All people gain equal standing before the law, right? Also, if you have money, in this system, it helps you gain a more equal standing. We just know that is true as far as who's representing you. And work involves some personal choice. Yes, you might want to be a brain surgeon, but that's got its own trajectory to do. Yes, you might want to be a famous comic book artist or an NBA basketball player, but you have some personal choice in that in as far as a class system. All right, what do you think? In this system that we have in the United States right now in the year 2020, do you feel you will be upwardly mobile in your life? Okay. And I'm hoping that the answer is yes for 100% of us. And we don't ever really get 100% of agreement, or very rarely. But again, you are here, you are working hard at this college. And if you're in this class system and you're in college, most of us, feel that means that there's time to be upwardly mobile. Now, that being said, people are not just mobile in one direction in a class system. There's all sorts of ways to fall down. That being said, if you have enough money and you can declare bankruptcy once, twice, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, oftentimes that's a bigger chance at a restart button than people who are in the lower socioeconomic areas or ladders, or in regards to how much money they make in their wealth. Oftentimes that is not the case. Those people do not have the same set of access to sort of, oh, my bad, start over. That is certainly something we afford more of the wealthy folks in this country. Also, when thinking about this mobility, I want you to think about what are some personal barriers of mobility for you in this class system. And for you, right? Barriers for me in this class system, there are going to be some of them, but as a person who identifies with the gender male and a person of European background or descent, this culture caters to me. If I cut my hair and shave my beard and put on a tie, all of a sudden, by doing hardly anything, I've got a lot of those barriers just moved. Whereas gender, perceived gender, the color of your skin, all sorts of things, age, a level of ability, would be certainly barriers that are not as easy to change as something like I just described that I could do. So we also understand in this stratification system, what are our privileges? Because in a stratification system, just because we are given a great deal of privilege doesn't mean that privilege is always going to work out for us. And if we perceive that we lose that, privilege can in fact be a massive barrier to us being able to adapt. All right. Let's move on and talk about a caste system. Birth determines social position in 4 ways. That is the real big part about birth. It's ascribed, not achieved. Occupation, marriage within the caste. Your social life is generally restricted to your own kind. When they call them untouchables, it's not because they're so awesome. It's because people don't want to touch them physically. Awful, yes, and that's where it comes from. Belief systems are often tied to religious dogma. So you have these old religious systems that have placed value on certain people over others, and that transmit as well. And so there you are in a caste system. For the most part, instead of being open, your social levels are closed. You will remain at the social level of your birth pretty much throughout life. Perhaps marriage could change that. However, marrying into a different caste is also very, very, very frowned upon. So you kind of see how that works or doesn't as well. Based on personal characteristics at birth, race, ethnicity, parental religion, parental caste. Pretty simple. Mobility, again, virtually impossible, ascribed rather than achieved. We have been looking, or I've mentioned a couple times, India's historical legacy of caste hierarchy. We could also look at U.S. slavery and segregation era. Even when slavery wasn't around, mobility for people of color, virtually impossible, based on a characteristic that is ascribed rather than achieved. So we do have some historical similarities when we're looking at that, particularly during segregation era, Jim Crow, and Reconstruction, however long that is still taking. All right, life chances. I talked about this, but here I believe are some of the big things that we look at that are associated with our life chances. So probabilities of benefiting or suffering from the opportunities or disadvantages one society offers. Your life expectancy is much different based on that. Principal cause of death will be much different. Your physical health throughout your life and your mental health, and what type of access you have to improving those or not, and having those get worse. The justice system. We know right now that our criminal justice system has so many massively institutionalized and measurable, statistically measurable inequalities that many folks find their way into jail just because of the color of their skin in the first place, let alone when we start to look at actual sentencing. Life chances certainly linked very much with your economic well-being, which of course is linked to all those others. So, question that you can kind of ask for yourself: do you or your parents, just think about yourself and your family, do you have more suffering or advantages in your life, in this culture or in your culture, as compared to the rest of the world, right? Because I feel like many times it's just a problem of us being able to get that perspective, right? So here's one perspective, right? This was during Occupy Wall Street, which I think was a very, very important social movement. Economic inequality, like the likes of which we're talking about and discussing in this chapter, are massive. They affect a lot of folks, right? So the perspective here would be there's 99% of us and the 1%. It doesn't really change if you say 96 and 4% or 95 and 5. It is a massively high number of people, right? The population, and then a very, very, very small percentage of people who are very wealthy that have a lot of privilege and power and access. But that's just the perspective of it here in the United States. I always want us to take a look at a global perspective, because we can't not anymore, right? We are interconnected, like it or not. Fukushima, the water that they're pumping there that is irradiated, that's going back in the ocean, that is impacting tuna and all sorts of fish, and the water and the radiation levels here and all across the globe, that's proof of our interconnectedness, right? So here's just our perspective here in the United States, but I'm going to ask you to think about it in a little bit different way too. And that's this, right? If we look at the privilege that we have in the United States compared to the rest of the world, suddenly we might find ourselves in that 1%. Does that mean that you're rich? Nope. But it might mean that you have some sort of health care. You don't have to walk 10 miles a day to get water. You have some health infrastructure. You have some emergency infrastructure. You have some water that is clean. You have, right? So if we really look at, again, the privilege, this is within our country. But if we look without our country, which I think is very, very important for us to develop a culturally, right, pluralistic point of view. I said it was the most important thing in this class in chapter 1. I probably talked about it in chapter 2, talk about it in every chapter. If we are thinking through the eyes of a bigger picture, this might be the way that we need to look at things, because we do have a great deal of privilege, even if we aren't very privileged as compared to the rest of the people here. Certainly in a global perspective, oftentimes many of us are. All right, we're going to wrap up. That was lecture 2 for chapter 7. I'm going to come at you with 3, but peace, everybody. Ooh, 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 ooh. Be good people and do good things. Cha-cha-cha-cha. Cha-cha-cha. Cha-cha-cha. That's the best way to end any song ever. So, good night, Minneapolis. Cha-cha-cha. Take care, everybody.